What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9, and I have some really interesting footage for you today. This is actually from a league game that I played. This is from a league game that I played this afternoon, and I am playing against poisonIvey. So I am running my current Sabine aggro testing build, which is currently built around playing for a cause I believe in. So very heavy on heroic units, and my opponent is playing a very interesting aggression Han. And so I'm going to lead off with Sabine Wren Explosives Artist, 2 cost 2/3 on attack. You may deal 1 damage to the defender or to a base. My opponent plays a Green Squadron A-Wing, 2 cost 1/3 with Raid in the Space Arena. Now, one really interesting thing you might notice about this is both of these decks are actually running 30 HP bases. So the reason for this on my part is I think that the meta is aggressive enough right now that I want to run a 30 HP base, which I think is going to be better than Jeddah City in a scenario where I'm racing against another aggro deck. So that's sort of the choice that I've made, and we'll see whether or not it pans out for me. So my opponent, I did use Sabine's ability. My opponent takes the initiative and plays a snapshot reflexes for +1/+1 and an immediate attack, dealing 4 damage with the A-Wing. My Sabine ran Explosives Artist hits the base for 3, and my opponent then deploys another A-Wing. At this point, I am going to play the Fighters for Freedom, and my opponent takes the initiative. I could do another 1 damage to each base. And yeah, so we're gonna see how things progress here. We have in hand here, I have Leia Defiant Princess, which could be a good thing to exhaust one of my opponent's units. Also a Bamboozle, which could do a similar role. My opponent swings in with the buffed A-Wing for 4 damage, 1 base, 2 from Raid, 1 from the Snapshot Reflexes. I'm going to swing in for 3 damage with my Fighters for Freedom, then for another 3 damage with Sabine. My opponent spends 2 resources to deploy, or to play, rather, deploy is for leaders, to play an Alliance X-Wing. I'm going to go ahead and use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base. My opponent uses Han's ability to create a temporary resource. I deploy Sabine. 3 resources then spent to play a Starwing Scout. That is a 4/1, and if it is defeated while you have the initiative, you get to draw 2 cards. So my opponent really heavy in space, whereas I am racing on the ground here. So I swing in with Sabine for 3, and I deploy K2SO, who also deals 1 damage to the opposing base, thanks to the Fighters for Freedom. And so my opponent now on 16 life, on 14 life, I am on 16 life. In this case, the life total stays 16 for the opponent and 14 for me. That is the damage done to the base. So my opponent has taken 16 out of 30 life for 14 remaining. I've taken 14 out of 30 life for 16 remaining. Um, and so we both actually have pretty decent boards with several units that can attack for substantial damage. My board is a small amount stronger on the ground than his is in space. Um, and we will see how things progress from here. Right now, I'm feeling like I can probably win this race. I do have a surprise strike in hand, plus some exhaust tech. My opponent is discarding a temporary resource there, and discards a headhunter, I believe, which is a sign that my opponent may be investing very heavily in space, given the units that I've seen in that headhunter, which is kind of it's not really a very good card. So I think the reason that it appears here is because this deck is doing a space skew. Um, and we will see whether or not I end up being able to keep pace here. poisonIvey thinking about what to do with that card, could turn it into a temporary resource to get Han to play it a turn earlier, could play it for whatever its effect is, could also make attacks with some of those units. I'm feeling pretty good about the situation though, with the surprise strike that I have in hand, multiple exhaust attacks with the Bamboozle and Leia. So my opponent tries to just deploy Han, and I point out that you have to be at 6 resources, so he uses the ability instead. I think he figured out that that was what he wanted to do, but then kind of jumped the gun and put Han out before actually doing that. So then I am going to go ahead and just press for the base. If I so I can do 3 damage there, and then I have another 10 damage on the board. And with the surprise strike, I can actually close the game this turn, assuming my opponent doesn't disrupt me, which I think he now cannot do. He deploys Han, but I exhaust Han with Leia Defiant Princess. Now my opponent can push a bunch of damage himself. He has 4, 7, 8, 9. He has 13 damage, which is enough to get me down to 3 life. But I don't think it's going to be enough. Swing in there for 4. Opponent swings in for 4. And I have the surprise strike to close the game with my next attack. Now, an interesting note is if I were on the 25 HP base, I would have, I, well, I wouldn't necessarily have lost the game. I could have used my action to give -4 to that A-wing, and the X-wing would only get me to 1 life, but it would have been a lot closer. So then I have the surprise strike to close the game with Sabine. My opponent took the initiative there with me at 22. I think, maybe hoping to draw something that would finish the game. I think we could see an outmaneuver to exhaust my whole ground arena. A surprise strike I don't think would have worked. At 22 life, surprise strike would be +3, so they would have had to been able to attack for 5, which I don't think was on the field. So I'm sideboarding out for a cause, which is a reach card that I am running in order to deal with situations where it's stabilized. I don't think this player is trying to stabilize. I think this player is trying to race me, and I'm going to substitute it. I'm going to put in open fire, which is going to allow me to interact more with the space arena. And I consider putting in shoot first as well in order to allow my spaceships to potentially fight. So shoot first is actually an important card in fights between space units. Um, at least in principle, because it allows 3 attack units to defeat it allows, yeah, 3 attack units to defeat 4 HP units and 2 attack units to defeat 3 HP units, both of which are quite relevant values in the space arena. But the we are not really seeing we're not really seeing that um, as the area that I most want to focus on, so I end up not siding in the shoot first. And we're going to go into round 2. Let's see what we can do here. All right, so knowing that I'm going to be racing in the ground arena, so A-wings are much worse when going second than when going first, because when going first, if the opponent plays an A-wing, or for the case of Han, if he uses his later ability and then plays the Falcon, he can defeat my A-wing very easily and still have his left on the field. That's really not a situation that I want to encounter. So I have my A-Wings resourced here, and I'm going to try to outrace him on the ground. My opponent plays an X-Wing, so if I had started with an A-Wing, I might have been able to get a favorable exchange there, but I would still be vulnerable to a lot of other cards that he could be running. So shoot first, snapshot reflexes, a lot of things can allow an X-Wing going first to defeat an A-Wing. So I deploy Sabine Ran Explosives Artist and use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base. I'm currently thinking that I am the faster deck, and that therefore I want to accelerate the game by using Sabine's ability and trying to close things out before Han Solo can make a big impact as a deployed unit. I have the advantage that Sabine gets to deploy a 1 or 2 turns before Han, depending on whether the opponent uses Han's leader ability in order to push faster. So in this case, my opponent plays the Falcon, so he has the Falcon plus an X-Wing. I have Sabine Wren, who's going to swing in for 3. And I could use my open fire, but what I want to do here is use Leia Defiant Princess, ready a resource, and then play the Lothal Insurgent to really beef up my presence. So I think that some of these smaller units, like the small 2/2s and stuff, are really good if the opponent is skewing away from that arena, because they are pretty cheap and can do a lot of damage. So like Leia is essentially a 1-cost 2/2, which is really a lot of value compared to say paying 3 for Fighters for Freedom, which is a 3/4. If I could play 1 for a 2/2 instead, that's going to be a lot more efficiency in a just pure aggro type game. And the Fighters for Freedom Sentinel is not very relevant, though it is possible that I would get some good value from the ability that allows me to deal damage when I play aggression units. Okay, so we are taking a look at the stuff here. I end up deciding I'm going to resource this Spark of Rebellion. My opponent surprise strikes me for 6. I can this turn I could play K2, but K2 is also kind of a reach card, so not really what I most want in this matchup. And instead, what I'm going to do here is play the Falcon, I think. Sabine hits for 3, X-Wing hits for 2, Lothal Insurgent hits for 3. Opponent uses Han's ability. I'm going to swing in for another 2 using Leia. My opponent brings out another A-Wing. I am going to still get to use Sabine's ability, 1 damage to each base. Opponent takes the initiative. I'm going to deploy Sabine, hit the base for another 3. And then I decide that I'm going to actually deploy the Falcon here and use it to hit my opponent's base as well. So I could have the Falcon attack my opponent's A-Wing instead, which would allow me to defeat an enemy unit and still have a relatively good position. But what I'm thinking here is that I want to push to try and close out the game. And so I'm thinking, I still have 14 life. My opponent has 8 damage on the board, plus could get 4 more from Hans. That would be 12, which is not lethal, even if everything gets to attack and I have no disruption and don't kill anything. Meanwhile, I would be able to defeat the opponent in like 3 attacks. So I'm thinking that I can win the game before my opponent can potentially get me. So I am going to go aggressive. My opponent does get the initiative here, and thinking about resourcing decisions and about which resource to discard. So Han's ability provides a temporary resource, and then at I believe it's the start of the next turn, you have to discard a resource. So it doesn't provide true ramp because you have to lose the resource later on. It's more acceleration. Now, one downside of this is you give information to your opponent about what's in your deck, but an upside to it is that it actually allows you to potentially bring those cards back in some situations. I don't think it's relevant with this build, but in particular, Green Han can play Home One, and Home One allows you to bring back a unit from the discard pile if it's heroic. So you might see things like if somebody resourced the Falcon, discarding it on purpose, even if it wasn't the temporary resource, since you can choose which resource to discard, and then using that to bring the Falcon back with Home One. My opponent ends up just I don't think it's relevant with this build, but it's good to get in the habit if you're playing Han, just in case you end up playing decks in the future where it does matter. Um, so a little interaction there to be mindful of. And now my opponent has the initiative and is going to spend 3 resources for the powerful outmaneuver, exhausting all units in a given arena. So that is going to be an extremely strong card. And yeah, tactic, choose an arena, ground, or space, exhaust each unit in that arena. For some reason, I'm suddenly very darkly lit. Not sure what happened there. I'm also kind of translucent. Weird. Well, I don't know what's up with that, but these things happen. There we go. I'm back to normal now, I think. Ish. Insofar as I ever look normal on here. Well, I swing in for 3 damage with my Falcon. My opponent goes ahead with a surprise strike using the A-Wing. That's going to be 5 damage to the base. Or 6 damage, I'm sorry. I play an open fire to clear the Falcon, and my opponent can swing in for 2 more with the X-Wing, but I take the initiative. So now we're in an interesting scenario. I have taken 24 damage. I have 6 life remaining. If my opponent draws the 3rd surprise strike, this A-Wing can surprise strike and win the game immediately. And I have multiple options. So one thing that I could do is attack the A-Wing with the Falcon to destroy it, which would prevent that. However, my opponent could then potentially surprise strike me with the X-Wing, deploy Han, and attack. I don't have an exhaust answer for Han, so I am at a bit of a loss there, and so attacking the A-Wing doesn't seem to work. So the strategy that I think I have to go for here is to just press the advantage, use the Fleet Lieutenant that I have in hand to send one of my units in for a bunch of damage on the ground, and then I'll still have either the Falcon to attack in space and win the game, or another ground unit to attack and win the game. If I use my Fleet Lieutenant, I can do 5 damage by attacking with either Sabine Wren or the Lothal Insurgent, um, and we will see if I can do that. If my opponent has the third surprise strike, it is over. I don't have anything that can really stop a win, but I just looked at my opponent's discard pile to make sure, and there are 2 surprise strikes already seen, so I think there's a pretty good chance that the third one is not waiting. And if it is, so it goes. And I want to also note this is a situation where that 25 HP base would have actually lost the game. If I had the 25 HP point base at this point in the game, it would be game over. I'm going to go with that Fleet Lieutenant attack for 5 with the Lothal Insurgent, and my opponent actually ends up conceding the game there. The third surprise strike did not turn up, and so I'm going to be able to attack with either the Falcon or with one of my ground units to get the win. So I do end up going 2-0 and getting the win in this league game. And big shout out to my opponent poisonIvey though. I think this was a really cool deck. So this is a aggression Han. It's an aggression Han like space skew that is playing aggro with a lot of space units and trying to get that damage in a way that the opponent doesn't expect. The the space skew means that a lot of cards that are effective counters to, anti-aggro cards that only work in the ground arena are dead against this deck. So the Imperial Death Trooper, for instance, can't pick off your units. Forced Choke doesn't do anything because you don't play ground units. Ground Sentinels don't impede you and are inefficient, so the space focus can be really effective. The main counter to this type of focus, ironically, is Outmaneuver, which most decks aren't playing, but this one is, so it can use Outmaneuver to exhaust a board full of ground units, as we saw last turn, and buy additional time for the space units to go in. We also have the 30 HP base, allowing for some extra time in the event of a race. Luckily for me, I was doing the same thing, and it enabled me, I think, to get the win at least in this round, and maybe in the match as a whole. So that's gonna be an interesting choice. I do think that in the current aggressive meta, you have to decide whether you want to be running a 30 HP base or a 25. The 25 HP bases do have relevant abilities, but in aggro mirrors, you might find yourself wanting to get more time for a race instead by running the 30 HP version. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this video, guys. I'm excited to show an interesting match and a showcase of a deck that I had not seen before with poisonIvey's space race Han, I'll call it. Um, and it was really interesting. So ultimately, I think poisonIvey had actually a strongly winning record in the league. I think I think he said he had gone 5-1 with this build prior to playing against me here. So very very interesting. Ultimately, I was able to race faster than it, but I could definitely see scenarios where this really catches somebody out. So shout out to poisonIvey for coming up with this interesting and innovative deck. And thanks to you guys for watching. I'll have my deck list in the video description below. And stay tuned for more. Stay tuned for, and now I'm transparent again. That's so weird. Stay tuned for some more Star Wars Unlimited content as we move towards the new year, 2023, and the actual release of this game, which doesn't come out until March. Okay, thanks again, guys. I'll be back later and see you guys soon.